It's the morning of June 23rd, 2010. We are in Far Hills at the office of Governor Kean. I'm Michael Aaron of NJN News. We're here for the Rutgers program on the governor, the Thomas H. Kean Archive. We began our conversations with Governor Kean in March of '09. This is our second conversation. We left off at the end of the governor's assembly career and the beginning of his run for Congress in 74-75 period. That's where we'll take up today. Governor, before we take a look at the race for Congress against Millicent Fenwick, a theme that seemed to emerge from our first discussion was the unexpected turns that your life and career have taken. This whole thing was an accident, was it? Maybe most lives are accidents, but you never intended to be governor of the state of New Jersey as a young man.
No.
Is that how life happens?
I think it does for a lot of people, and I tell students that. I say, don't worry, frankly, if you're not quite sure what you want to do with your life, and you're going to try something that may not be what you want to do, don't worry about it. Try it. Because something else will come along. Or maybe if you try 2 or 3 things. Some people try 5 or 6 things. Christopher Reeve told me once that his brother tried maybe 10 things. He just couldn't find what he wanted to do. And he ended up at the age of 35 or 38 in a small country in Africa, trying to help them with their economic situation. And all of a sudden he figured, this is what I was born to do. This is what I love to do. And he went back and got his degree from Wharton School of Economics. And he'd never been interested enough to anything like that before. They went back to Africa. And Chris said he couldn't be prouder of him. Because he was in the Peace Corps, he was taught for a while in a prep school, he did 5 or 6 different things, and he couldn't really find what he wanted to do. And I think that happens to lives. I mean, it takes a while sometimes for people to really find out what they were meant to do.
By the time you were in the assembly, were you committed to a life in politics and government?
Oh, no. No. No, in fact, if something more interesting had come along during that period, I was running a small business, and during that time, and
a real estate business?
Yeah, a real estate investment firm, and it gave me time enough to do the legislature. And looking around, I almost took another job once.
What was it?
I was offered to be the head of the National Council of the Metropolitan Opera. And I've always loved opera. Would have given me an office in the Metropolitan Opera, travel all over the country with the auditions and all of that. It was I came within about an inch of taking that job.
How do you feel about that now?
Well, I probably was better off with what I did. Although sitting in that opera house and listening to the rehearse would have been sort of fun.
All right, let's pick up then with your interest in running for Congress. When we left off, I think I said, gee, you challenged Millicent Fenwick, and you said, no, she challenged me.
Yeah.
What year are we in now?
Wow, back in...
It's the post-Watergate.
Yeah, it's just after Watergate. In fact, it's still Watergate.
So would it have been 74 or 76?
It would have been 74, I guess. It was right in the middle of Watergate. And I think 74. And
you were the Republican leader in the assembly, or a Republican?
A Republican leader, yeah. And what had happened was that the incumbent congressman, who was Peter Frelinghuysen, Rodney's father, was retiring after a very distinguished career, but at a fairly young age. Congressmen don't retire usually, but he was doing it, and so it left the seat open. And the Republicans were very concerned that because of Watergate, remember this was the year the Assembly, must have been, no, you know what it was? It was after I was Speaker, because this was the year when the Republicans had been cut back to 14 out of 80. And the Republicans were losing districts and counties and seats they never would have thought of losing before, and they were worried about losing this congressional seat. So they approached me, and their Morris County organization, with Peter Frelinghuysen, chief of staff, and Rodney, and came and said, you got to do this, because otherwise we're going to lose the seat. And I wasn't terribly enthusiastic about doing it, because I was never that interested in Washington. But they sort of convinced me that it would be interesting, and my father was still alive. And he had been in Congress for 20 years, and that was what he always wanted me to do. He never understood the state, never understood why I liked to be in the state. He always thought I was wasting my time and I should be running for federal office. And so I thought it would please him so much. And so I sort of agreed to do it. And what I didn't know at that point is that about the same time, Brendan Byrne was his first year as governor. That'll give you a key to the year. It was Brendan's first year as governor.
74. Then.
Yeah. And Brendan, Millicent Fenwick under Governor Cahill had been the director of consumer affairs, and because Millicent was sort of a bipartisan figure and bigger than life, she never thought that he wouldn't keep her. She thought she was there for life, I think, if she wanted to. And Brendan called her in at some point, and in about March, and said, Millicent, I so appreciate you staying on until I could find a replacement. And it was a shock to her. And she started to think, what am I going to do?
Excuse me 1 second. She was larger than life even back then. Is that because, who was she? I know she was a Vogue model in the 30s, but why was she already a larger than life person in 73?
Well, she had been a character around the state. She had been active in Republican politics in a number of ways. She had served in the state legislature for a number of years, and I'm not saying she's not what she became later on, but in the area which she represented, Morris, Somerset, those counties, everybody knew Millicent, and she used that job as consumer protection head to enhance that. I mean, she would take, if there were 4 people gathered together, Millicent would come and speak to them. So she had spoken to every little club, particularly around those 2 counties.
Did you know her?
Did I know Millicent?
Yeah.
Oh, we were very close friends. Yeah,
you like her?
Yeah, very much, because we'd worked in the legislature together, and we agreed on almost everything.
Was she in the assembly when you were in
yes.
the assembly?
Oh, yeah. And so, and she voted to make me leader, voted to make me speaker.
So the party asks you to run for Frelinghuysen's seat, and then she on her own.
She said, was honest. Said this to me. Look, she said, I've stepped aside from men all my life. And she said, I'm looking now, and there's no way that my senator is going to retire from Somerset County. The 2 assembly seats are taken. I want to be in public life, and this is open. So I'm going to run for it. I went to Sawyer and said, we shouldn't run against each other, Millicent. She said, I'm just not going to step aside again. I stepped aside too often. And I said, well, I understand that. So I guess I was too far advanced then. I'd sort of hired a staff. I'd raised some money. I was too far gone to really, I would have probably might have stepped aside at that point, but I was too far into the race. And so we agreed to do a primary, in which she turned out to have a tremendous advantage, because there are only 2 towns from my legislative district in the district, the congressional district. And she had all of Somerset County, and I guess maybe a couple of towns in Morris out of her legislative district, plus she had the consumer affairs running around, and she was, her name recognition was, I thought my recognition was pretty high, because I'd been pretty prominent in the legislature, but wasn't as good as hers at that point in this particular part of the state.
Do you know roughly what she beat you by? Or?
Yeah, it was a recount.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was a, we came.
81 wasn't your first recount?
No, I had experience of the recount before. It was, I lost, I think it was by 76 votes out of about 30,000 cast. And I know why I lost because of one town.
What town?
Middlesex County, a little piece of the district, and the mayor was all for me. And he said, you got a lot to do in Morris and Somerset. Just do that, and I'll take care of my town. And so the council's for you, the mayor's for you, everybody's for you. So I've been paying attention to it. And that's why I lost. I lost that.
You want to say what town it was in Middlesex?
I'm trying to remember. I thought I'd never forget. I think it was Middlesex itself. Town.
Middlesex Borough.
Yeah, I think it was. But But I lost it by, I don't know, a couple of hundred votes maybe.
Was it a tough defeat?
No, not for me, because it wasn't anything I terribly wanted to do, in honesty. Although you never like to lose, and you particularly don't like to lose because people, in an election, it's not just yourself. People work very, very hard for you, and they give their time, and they take time off from their jobs, and people did that for me in that campaign. And so they worked terribly hard, and I remember going to the headquarters at night to concede. Well, I didn't concede, because it turned out to be a tie almost, but I thought I was going to concede. And a couple of the women were crying, you know, and I thought, you know, this isn't about me. This is about people who have been worked very hard and believed in me. And they're so upset. I can't not be upset. But it was a kind of campaign we should have more often. I mean, I remember at one point the paper asked Millicent, "What would you do if you lost?" And she said, "Tom Kean would be blessed if he were our congressman." And that was, you don't say that about your opponent very often. So we had that kind of relationship. I mean, we were friendly before, we were friendly afterwards. We stayed great friends till the end of Millicent's life. And we, say, disagreed on very few issues. I think I may have been a little tougher on Nixon than she was, but that was about it.
I believe there was somebody who would later become one of your inner sanctum who worked on her campaign against you. I can't.
Roger Budman.
Was it Roger?
Oh yeah, yeah. Roger was her driver. Yeah. Now, if you were Somerset County was then run by a chairman called Luke Gray. Luke Gray was one of the best county chairmen in the entire state, in the sense that he had his organization pulled together, and when Luke said march, everybody said yes, sir, and they all marched in the same direction. So I remember once she had announced and Luke had said this organization is totally for Millicent Fenwick, I couldn't get into things. I mean, they'd almost try to bar me at the door of what was almost public meetings. I mean, I'd walk in and nobody speak to me. Everybody go to the bar when I walked in. Turn my back, turn it back. I mean, it was a experience for me of what happens when an organization has a good candidate, and Wilson was a good candidate, but somebody they're totally loyal to. It was very, very hard. It was interesting because some of the things that happened in that campaign laid the seeds because under that organization, it was Ray Bateman and Millicent Fenwick and a lot of very good people who were very important in the state at that point. But they were considered at that point to be, in modern language, the liberals of the party, and Rockefeller Republicans or what have you, which I was sort of too. But the conservatives all supported me because I was running against the establishment, and they were all anti-establishment. So I had this huge, all I had in Somerset was this cadre of very strong conservatives who just supported me to the end and just basically told Luke Gray where to go because they thought he was supporting liberals. And that group stayed with me. And that group stayed with me and I ran for governor. So I had this core of some of the conservative support in the state who stayed with me until I ran for governor.
Did they stay with you through your governorship?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're friends. You know, we made friends. Even if they'd get a little annoyed with me every now and then. Some of the things I did, they weren't terribly supportive of. But there was enough. There was always enough in what I did for conservatives not to have a problem with me. I never had any conservative primaries or anything like that. I mean, they basically supported me all the way through the governorship.
When you say they were anti-establishment, so they were against Millicent Fenwick, it almost seems like the echo of today with Tea Party versus establishment. Is it similar?
Yeah.
Was it similar?
Yes, but without the publicity and and it wasn't as big, frankly. They were just people who had and there were more, in those days they were more fiscal conservatives and less what you call now social conservatives. But they cared very much about dollars and spending and so on, and they thought that the leadership of Somerset County was leadership in the state and spending more of people's money than they ought to, and that they were a little lack over the president. They thought there were too many taxes and too much spending, and they also thought they were elitist. They thought that in this part of the we're sitting in Port of Somerset County now, that in this part of Somerset County was the rich folks, and the other part of Somerset County wasn't represented.
You were a sitting assemblyman when you ran for this
Yes.
congressional nomination.
Yeah.
So you stayed in the assembly until when? Do you recall?
Yeah, I was there 10 years. I was elected.
67 to 77?
Yeah. And I at that point, I'd been in the minority for a couple of years because of Watergate. And I stayed one term in which I think I about more than doubled. It wasn't hard to do after that big loss at Watergate, but I about doubled the number. And I really ran the campaign to get some of our old districts
That was
back.
in 75.
Yeah, and I worked hard on that, and I raised money. First time, I think, now it's just common. Legislative leaders have PACs and everything else. Nobody had done it before. I raised a bit of money myself, and then didn't give it. The other thing that used to happen is the senior Republicans all used to get the money if there was any money around, because they were the ones with clout. So it didn't matter if they had safe districts; they'd still get whatever state money was out there. I didn't do that. I raised the money and gave it only to the districts who were trying to get back.
Were you the minority leader in the
Yes,
assembly?
I was a minority leader. Yeah, and we raised the money, spent a lot of it on cartoons. I had a cartoonist. We'd make cartoons of the Democrats and what they were trying to do, and put them in the local papers in the districts, and do a lot of radio ads. Oh, people like that. I mean, people notice things like that. They notice they may not read the rest of the paper, but they notice the cartoons, the advertisements, and so on. So it worked out, and we got back a good many seats we'd lost. We didn't become majority again, but we weren't going to become majority again until I won in '85. But it got back as decent minority, and it was fun being minority leader for a while, because it was a different position. You know, frankly, it's easier to oppose than to support, and it's very easy to put the rocks in the machine to stop it from running, and particularly when you know the rules. And because I'd been so long a speaker and majority leader and all of that, I knew the rules of the assembly better than anybody else. And I could bring that place to a halt at any time, and I did. And I got annoyed at the Democrats for this or that. And plus which, the Democrats were very nice to me because I'd been nice to them. I mean, they remembered when I'd been speaker and when majority leader, and I'd given them a fair amount of staff, and I'd given them privileges, and I'd given them whatever they wanted usually to be an effective minority. So it was very hard for them not to deny me any of the same thing. And because a lot of them were close friends of mine, particularly people like Howard Woodson, who was the speaker, I didn't have any problems really dealing with them, and they when I really wanted a bill, they'd help me get it through.
You say you kind of liked being the minority leader.
For a while.
You could throw rocks in the machine.
Yeah.
It makes me think of your son, who is minority leader in the state Senate now. He was minority leader when a Democrat was governor. Now a Republican is governor. Does his role change significantly when he has a Republican governor?
Yeah, I never had a Republican governor as minority leader. I had a Republican governor as speaker and as majority leader. And that there, your role is essential. I mean, you put the votes together for the governor and the governor's legislation, and that's not always easy. Sometimes it's impossible. I mean, I tried to put the votes together for Cahill's income tax. That was not easy. In fact, it was impossible. And at the end, we actually had more votes than people thought for that. But in the end, the governor called me into his office and said, "We haven't got the votes, have we?" And I said, "No." And because the Democrats weren't really supporting us at all on the income tax. And so he said, "Look, I don't want people defeated over this. So you tell the people who want to not vote for it in the end, I'll understand." If I said that in caucus, I said, I know you've been with me all along, and fine, but if you don't really want to, we had about 36, 37 votes, I think. And most of them left. Left a very small group of us voting for the income tax.
Between 75 and 77, you started thinking about running for governor?
No. No, not really. That didn't until the very end of my term. The first thing I decided to do was leave the assembly. I didn't see us getting back into the majority for some time. And that turned out to be true, because we didn't get back until 1985. I didn't want to be just an opposition leader. It got to be not fun anymore. So I decided to leave the assembly, and that was the first decision. And there were some things I cared about a lot that I'd never been able to do, mainly in two areas I was interested in. I was very interested in the environment, and had written most of the environmental bills in the previous 10 years, and education. And I wanted to go out with a bang and not a whimper. I thought I'd give 10 years of my life to this. And I'm not prominent enough now as a minority leader to make much waves for anything. And I can't get things I really care about through because I'm in a minority. So how do you make an impact? And I thought, well, running for governor, whether you win or lose, you can make an impact. And you can get things talked about that might not be talked about otherwise. And so I decided really on that basis only to run for governor. Not because and it was difficult because the Republican presumptive candidate was somebody I'd worked with very closely in the legislature. He was a good friend then, is a good friend now, Ray Bateman. And Ray and I didn't disagree on a lot of things. Ray and I had been very friendly. He'd been the leader of the Senate Republicans. I'd been the leader of the Assembly Republicans. And I was very this way, that way about whether to run, because of Ray, mainly. And when I said I was going to declare, Ray said, will you come see me? And I said, sure. And I thought, oh, he's going to tell me it's bad for the party to have a primary. He's going to tell me he really thinks he can win without a primary. He's going to tell me all that stuff. And by the time he finishes, I'm probably going to say, okay, Ray, I'll support you. He never did it. I went into his office and said, "You've made up your mind? You're really going to run?" I said, "Yeah, I am." He said, "Fine." And that was it. That was the end of the conversation. So, and I think at that point, he could have talked me out of it.
That's kind of like the stories about the politician who forgets to ask for your vote.
Yeah,
right?
That's right. Well, I think I can understand, Ray, but I guess when somebody says publicly they're probably going to run for governor, you don't think you're going to probably be able to talk them out of it, although I think he could have. At least he would have had a good chance of it. I went there thinking that, a little uncertain if he really puts the arm on me whether I want to do this.
Was part of your thinking, you say you wanted to get some issues, some attention on some issues. Was part of your thinking also that you would run and get yourself known, and the next time perhaps you would be a more formidable candidate?
It worked out that way, but no, not at all. Because at that time, Brendan Byrne was one of our more unpopular governors in history after the income tax. And everybody assumed that the winner of the Republican primary was going to be governor. I assumed that if Ray Bateman beat me in the primaries, he probably was going to, because I had no party support really that year, that he was going to be the governor of the state for the next 8 years. And who knows where I'd be at that point. So no, I didn't think that at all. I thought this is my last chance to make some points that I want to make about where the state of New Jersey should be doing, where it should be going, why education and environment are important, what are some of the things we should be doing in that area.
Did you get to make those points?
Yeah, but nobody paid a lot of attention to them. They paid a lot of attention. You know how campaigns are. I mean, you do position papers and work hard on them, and issue those position papers, and the story the next day is, somebody's sort of scandal somewhere, or somebody's done something in your campaign you didn't expect, and or somebody's taken a poll, and that's the lead, and a little paragraph in the last page is your 15-page position paper. So it wasn't quite as I expected it to be.
Is that a criticism of the media, or is that just human nature, the way that happens?
Well, I think it's both. I mean, the media, understandably, is going to try to sell newspapers. and you don't sell newspapers probably through a 20-page paper on what we should be doing about higher education in the state. It's just a little too esoteric for people and doesn't make a good headline. And so now I guess we would have put it out, today's world, we would have put it out on the web and people would have read it there and all of that. But newspapers were the only way you had in those days to get anything out. And so we put on position papers, but they sort of sunk like a stone in the ocean. Nobody knew they'd even been there before, and it was disappointing. But the campaign was fun in many ways, and again, it turned out I did develop loyalists. I mean, people who really thought I'd be a good governor came out of the woodwork. I remember the whole Republican Party, except my own county, opposed me. I think I had 2 county chairmen out of 21 that year.
What two?
Gene McCaffrey, who became later in my cabinet, who was down in Gloucester County, and my own chairman, John Rennan, Essex. And those were the only 2. But places like Bergen, where the whole organization went against me, a local school board member who was chairman of the school board in Ridgewood, whose name was Marge Rockema, said, you know, I think you'd be the best candidate. An old buddy of mine from the Army stuck up his head and said, I want to work for you, remember me? And I said, yeah, we've been good friends, Gary Stein. And people sort of surfaced. And they were not political, most of them. Another guy who had never run for office before, but thought I'd be a good governor, said you have to have a ticket in the county. If I'd be helpful by going on your ticket. I will, but I don't really want. His name was Kerry Edwards. But all these people sort of surfaced, who later became very important to me, and they were so good for us that we ran even in Bergen County. We held the organization even, which was remarkable in those days. And that happened in a number of other counties too. And the basis of those people who came out and supported me that particular election, most of them did form the crux and the basis, plus which, again, and this is very important to me, the conservatives. They all supported me, or most of them supported me. And a number of them stayed with me. Even though when I ran for re-election, I was running against some people who were nominally more conservative than I was, and ran on a more conservative ticket. They became loyalists, and some of them ran and supported me right through the next election.
Anybody come to mind in that group?
Yeah, there was a guy from this county, I don't remember his name. He's passed away now, an Irishman, but he just was dogged. I mean, he'd work all day long for somebody he believed in. It was terrific, and I think Frank Holman in Ocean County was a tough, former young Republican, conservative.
You named him state party chairman.
Yeah.
Eventually, when you were governor.
He and I met in a diner off the Toms River, off the Garden State Parkway. I never met him before. Somebody said you ought to get together. And he'd been chairman of the Young Republicans down in Ocean County. And he said, you know, the whole organization's gone out against you here. And I said, I know. And he said, well, let's talk for a while. And we talked for a while, and he said, you know, I like you. And he said, I think we can put together something down here in Ocean County. And he put together basically the conservatives and some others, we won the county convention underground because Ray took it for granted. He had the whole, like I did for that small town I ran against Millicent. He had the whole organization for him and the county chairman, and he thought that was not a problem. Ocean County has a convention every year, and the mayors are all delegates. I went to see every mayor. Take every mayor out to lunch or dinner or what have you in the whole county. I found out who was representing senior citizens. I went and saw them. I saw almost every...
Did you enjoy that part of it?
I enjoyed getting to know people. I mean, people are great. And, you know, getting to know people and trying to sell them on a cause is not a bad thing to be doing. And I did enjoy it. Sometimes you don't. I mean, sometimes you run into some people who just aren't great people. Want to support you, but support you for the wrong reasons, or support you if you promise them something and so on. It's sort of irritating. But that's not the majority. That's a small fraction of people. And mostly they're good people. They want to do right things, and they try and support you for the right reasons, and they become loyal to you in remarkable ways, and it turns out they'll do things for you that you never would expect in terms of their own time and energy, in some cases resources. And that almost always surprised me. When I'd hear that somebody had taken time off from their job, and working the last week of the campaign full time for me somewhere, I just thought, well, my goodness, that's really extraordinary that somebody would give up a week of pay and a week of everything else and go give up a week's vacation and go work for you. And a lot of people did that.
Who was your team in that campaign? Who ran the campaign? Who was your advisor?
My campaign manager was Tony Ciccatello. Tony Ciccatello had come into the state to run my campaign for Congress. He was from Ohio, and he represented the Food Council nationally as a representative or what have you. I spoke, I guess it was from the legislature at the Food Council breakfast. And Tony said, I've never heard somebody speak like that. It's very interesting what you said and how you said it and so on. And when I ran for Congress, I was looking for somebody to come in and run the campaign. And Tony had been attracted by that one speech I'd given to the Food Council, and he came in and said I'd be volunteer for the position of campaign manager. And
he still likes your speeches 35 years later.
Yeah, he became one of my closest friends, and lived in our house for a while. After the campaign, he had no place to live, and we moved in, and he didn't have any money for rent, so he painted our front hall, that kind of thing.
Anybody else? Era?
I took a guy off the press corps called Greg Stevens, who had been the most impressive reporter I'd known, and we haven't talked, I don't think, about the Ford campaign. But that was my first big political job in the state, and I had to pick people for that, and I'd pick Greg Stevens for that. And
Greg had been at the Woodbridge News Tribune.
Good for you. Woodbridge News Tribune was right, and what impressed me was when I was out at the convention, and that convention was the closest convention in a long, long time. I mean, Reagan almost beat Ford.
76.
Yeah, at the convention.
Where was that convention?
It was in was it Detroit or I get confused.
Detroit was 80.
Yeah.
Was it 76? I mean, was it San Francisco?
This was 76.
Oh well.
Yeah, I don't remember where it was now.
Okay.
But I get confused what cities these conventions are in. It wasn't Miami. That was the year before. But anyway, what impressed me was that the press was all, because it was so close. And New Jersey was a little, I thought I knew exactly the number of votes I had for Ford, but there was a lot of, there was still some undecided delegates and so on. And I remember one time I was taking some delegates over to see Nelson Rockefeller. The idea of he was going to try and convince them to get off the fence. And so we got in the car, and the press was all swarming around. And I said, we're just going. And it was a station wagon. And Greg Stevens said, if you put the back down, I'll sit on that. He hung with his legs over the, and I thought he's risking his life to get a story. You go through traffic, and I figured, anybody who's got that kind of energy impressed me, because he was a guy who really just would go the extra mile, working for a tiny paper in the state, but was frankly a more energetic and a better reporter than the rest of them.
He's credited with your turnaround in your first year, in your second year in your political fortunes once you became governor. Rightly so?
In part, certainly. He turned out to be a great chief of staff, and he was an extraordinary help, because he took all the political side away from me. At least he never take it away from you. But he handled all that, all the county chairmen and so on, which I didn't have a lot of time for when I was trying to run the state. He did all that stuff. And so he kept the political stuff. He got Frank Holman to be state chairman at that point, and they just ran the political side. Told me when the dinners I had to attend where they really wanted me, and I could worry about running the state. That was a great help. But there were people in that campaign, and that for the Ford campaign, who moved then right into the
Let's go back then to the Ford campaign a little bit. How is it that you became head of the state effort to, I guess I was going to say to re-elect Ford, but Ford was never elected?
Well, yeah, it surprised me because I assumed, as what usually happens, that the state chairman, the state organization, was going to run the presidential campaign.
Who was state chairman?
Webster Todd, who was Christy Todd Whitman's father, who was one of the nicest people you could ever meet in the world. Everybody loved him. But the Ford people in Washington had a supposition that he was weak and that he had not run a good organization, and they didn't want him to have anything to do with running the campaign. So my father had been a friend of Jerry Ford's in Congress. They'd served together for 20 years and were close personal friends. And I'd been the leader of the legislature, was thought I was one of the young coming Turks in the state and so on. And I guess they knew about it through my father and through other reasons, and they called me. And a fellow who was Ford's chief of staff, named Dick Cheney, called me and said, "We'd really like you to be the campaign manager." And I said, "What about the state organization?" He said, "We want you to be the campaign manager." And I said, "What kind of authority will I have?" He said, we will give you a budget and full authority."
You were the minority leader
Yes.
in the assembly at the time.
Yes. And he said, you will have every decision you make will back up. And you'll be total charge of the campaign, all decisions. So I said, okay. And we got ourselves a little headquarters in Woodbridge and got Tony and Greg Stevens, a guy called John LaBouche, who later became a congressman from Long Island, and a few others. I hired Eleanor Todd, Webb's wife, to work in the headquarters, Christy's mother, who was terrific, and knew all the women in the state and could just get on the phone. And everybody who could move anything, Eleanor knew who they were and how to get to them. And I got a lot of experience running that campaign. So whenever the candidate came into the state, as he did a number of times, because New Jersey was supposed to be a swing state, I was in full charge of where he went, what he did, how it was handled.
He was president of the United States at the time.
Yes, so it was very exciting. I mean, he would come into the state. I'd meet him at the airport, get in the car, and tell him where to go. And
Did you like him?
I liked him tremendously. Jerry Ford was one of the nicest people, and I believe had he been reelected, would have turned into one of this country's great presidents, because he was learning and getting better every month. And people told me that, who'd worked with a number of presidents in the White House, Republicans and Democrats, that Jerry Ford grew more in that job than anybody they'd seen. And they said, and I would agree, that had he had a chance for a full term, that he would have been a very, very good president.
He ran against Reagan in a primary in New Jersey.
And nationwide.
And nationwide.
And almost came very close to, in fact, if New Jersey had been, if New Jersey delegation had split as it was supposed to originally, because the state party decided to do a sort of delegation that hopefully wouldn't result in a primary in the state, and then let the delegates themselves decide who they want to vote for. Now, people knew that probably Webster Todd and some of the others were all going to swing, probably to stay with Ford, but that there's a whole bunch of people from the counties that nobody knew how they were going to go. And that was the delegation we had to deal with, and that was my job, was to
keep them for Ford at the convention.
And I'll tell you, there was a moment in New Jersey that nobody knows about that could have changed history. I went to see every one of those delegates. The Reagan people had no informed presence in the state, so they didn't really know these people at all. They didn't have anybody who had been a leader in the legislature or anything in the state. And they had a campaign manager, but it was I remember a guy from Bergen County who he hadn't been active, so he didn't know the state at all. And so I went around to see, and I was basically running in a clear field. Nobody else was doing this. So each of talked to these people and decide why they should support Ford, why they should support me, why they should support the organization. And I knew a lot of them because I'd been around politics in New Jersey as minority leader for a long time. I'd been in all their counties and all their districts. And so, and anyway, went and got, so I thought we had good, at least 3/4 of them for Jerry Ford. And I got a call from Reagan's campaign manager and said, I know, that you're running the Ford campaign and all of that, and we don't want to, get in your face really. We're not really going to contest New Jersey badly, but Governor Reagan would love to meet with the delegates, and he's going to be in the state, flying in and out. He's coming to Newark Airport. Going to do something in New York, but he'll be in New Jersey for an hour or so. And would you consent? Because I know if the Utah delegates were not to come, they probably won't come. Will they come? And I said, fine, I think it'd be honored to have Governor Reagan in the state meet with the delegates.
Was that a tough decision?
No. He was got a presidential candidate. I'm going to stop people from hearing the presidential candidate? I thought that was wrong, And so I wasn't worried about it much either because I'd gotten their commitments. So Reagan came into the airport. Delegation almost all came in one of those little rooms at one of those airport hotels. And Reagan walked in and gave one of those speeches that people found out later that Reagan could give. I didn't remember how good he was, but he was terrific. But I said, well, fine, And he left. Then I started getting calls. I'd lost half the delegation, and all Reagan had done was speak to them and shake their hand. There was no follow-up or anything. I'd lost half the delegation, and that would have been enough to give Reagan a nomination. So I got back on the road in my car. I went back to every one of those delegates, re-talked them around, re-talked them into why they should, and we got them all back. But it took probably a month of visiting to do that. And the Reagan people had no idea what his impact had been. No idea that they'd gained delegates. No idea that the New Jersey delegation was then split. Had they realized it, had they followed up, I think Reagan would have been the nominee. And history might have been different. Would have been different.
Would have been different.
Yeah. And it was, but it was an interesting campaign because two things happened. One is I learned how to square a president or nominee around, which I was going to do a lot more. Time went on. So and Ford was so darn honest. You couldn't tell Ford to say anything political. And I remember he was coming into Atlantic City in that campaign. And that was the year that gambling was on the ballot for Atlantic City. So I picked up Ford in Philadelphia. We were driving to Atlantic City for a speech. And I said to him when I picked him up the plane, I said, there's this issue on the ballot in New Jersey for gambling. And I said, because you're speaking in Atlantic City, the first question is going to be, how do you feel about gambling? And your answer is very simple. It's a state issue. I'm not going to get involved in state issues. I'm running for president. I have nothing to do with that. And I said, that's an honest answer. Fine. I said, yes, I understand that. And so we got a little closer to Atlantic City. I said, Mr. President, I just want to remind you, this gambling issues, do not get involved in it. It's just a state issue, and then go on to questions about the national committee. Fine. So Ford gave his speech in Atlantic City. As I knew it would be, the first question out of the box from the press was, Mr. President, we've got a gambling referendum, and how do you feel about gambling? Ford said, I really think it's morally wrong, and it's going to victimize small people who don't have the wherewithal to resist it. And so I think a social policy is a very bad thing. I'd certainly urge people to vote against it. And I went, ooh. To do it in Atlantic City, which was...
Did it hurt him?
Yes, but we carried the state anyway. And that was... Dick Cheney called me I guess the day before the election, and said, you've been one of our best state chairmen. I can't tell you what a wonderful job you've done. We've taken our final tracking polls, but you're not quite going to make it. They're going to take New Jersey.
They meaning Reagan, or they meaning the Democrats?
Democrats in the fall. They're going to take New Jersey. Yes, Carter was going to take New Jersey, and Brendan Byrne was very active for Carter, working very hard for Carter, but thank you anyway very, very much, and don't worry about it because our polls show we're going to carry Pennsylvania, so that means we have a good chance at the election. Because Election Day came, we carried New Jersey and lost Pennsylvania.
So you won that.
We won it, and unexpectedly, even against the polls. But we worked very, very hard. I mean, we had people out in the street. We had all sorts of things. I did things that, nobody else had done up to that point. I mean, I had one of my nephews coming in as a volunteer every morning at 5 o'clock in the morning. And every day we had him taking a statement, because we had surrogates coming into the state, or I would make a statement, or whoever. And it would be a statement why Ford should be elected or why Carter shouldn't be. And we'd turn it into an actuality. And at 5 every morning, we'd feed it out to all these, at that point, hundreds of little stations around, radio stations around New Jersey, who were really looking for something local on their news. And almost all would run it. So we were in drive time every morning with we did that kind of thing, which I don't think anybody else was doing at that point.
In hindsight, Ford was so hurt by that comment in the debate about Eastern Europe not being under Soviet domination.
Yeah.
In your memory of that campaign, was that a major milepost or gaffe?
Yeah, it was very difficult. I mean, all of us who knew Ford knew what he meant. He didn't mean that, but he said it. And the last time he came into New Jersey, I had him up to Union, and there was a town and campus hotel or something. They had him speak in up there, and I asked every ethnic editor of every newspaper, the Italian Tribune, the Polish, whatever, and so on. We had about 40 of them, or 50 of them maybe, if they'd come and meet with the president. And they all said yes. And so Reagan came in. I said, I got the ethnic editors, and the staff said he hasn't got time. He's late in the schedule and hasn't got time to do it. And I said, he made this remark. I've got you can have the week before the election, you can have the front page of every ethnic newspaper in the state whose editors are going to have time with the president. I said, that'll make a difference. They said, well, thank you for doing it, but we just haven't got time. So Reagan finished speaking, and I said, Mr. President. Ford, I'm sorry, I keep saying Reagan.
Yeah,
Ford. Ford, I said, Mr. President, your staff tells me you don't have time to do this. Let me tell you what I've done. I've got these 40 or 50 ethnic editors, every ethnic paper in the state, waiting 2 rooms away, who want to spend half an hour or 45 minutes with you and ask you a few questions on your remarks in the debate and other things. I said, if you do that, I will guarantee you the front page of almost every one, if not every one of those newspapers the week before the election. And Ford said, great. I said, your staff tells me you don't have time. He looked behind at one of the staff members and said, I have time. And so I took him in. He met with all 40 or 50 ethnic editors. He was on the front page the week before the election of almost every one of those papers. And I think that's, if nothing else, is one of the reasons we carried New Jersey.
You say that Dick Cheney was the campaign manager.
He was the chief of staff in the White House.
At the White House.
Yeah, so he was the one really.
What was your feeling about him at the time?
Oh, I liked working with him. He was one of the bright young people, and he wasn't the Dick Cheney he became. He was the Dick Cheney who was the youngest chief of staff probably in American history. He was a Dick Cheney who then went to the House and was the youngest leader ever elected by either party in the House at that point, and elected after a shorter time than anybody else, which shows the respect he had among his colleagues. And he was, I liked him. I liked him very much. We stayed, we had a few differences over the years, but...
Did he change a lot, or is he more misunderstood and characterized as something he's not?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure. I think he changed, but then I haven't been close to him in recent years. People who are very close to him saying they don't think he changed that much. But he would seem to have hardened on his positions and become a more sort of domineering kind of force. He never was, with me, he was always, what do you think we ought to do? If that's what you think, go ahead and do it. He was very, very... And he was always trying to give me money. I mean, I remember that campaign, and I kept saying, I don't need it, we're doing fine. And he said, "You're the only state who's turned back money." But so he was trying to do everything he could to help and letting me run it. I mean, he was totally. It's your campaign in New Jersey. You know what to do. We don't know what to do. And a couple of other interesting things that campaign. I remember Bob Dole came in, who was a vice presidential candidate, and I had 2 stops for him. In those days, the presidents and the vice presidents didn't have, even though Ford had been shot at, didn't have the security. I mean, I took Ford to the Bergen Mall and walked him through the crowds in the mall. Now, he's surrounded by sort of a bubble of Secret Service, but you can imagine where security has come today. You just couldn't have done that. And Dole I had the same kind of things for. And then at the last minute, he said he was going to stay he could do one more stop. And I said, well, let me think about what that ought to be. He said, no, we got it. The Mercer County Republican Chairman has got one for us. I said, what? Well, there then was a fair of some sort in the fall in Mercer County. So we'll come to that, and they've got a racetrack, and they've got grandstands. So I said, I don't know anything about that. And they said, well, don't worry. It's one thing you don't have to worry about. I'll do it. So I took him to his first 2 stops, which were enormously successful. Took him to the last one in Mercer County at this county fair, and he was the racetrack, and I put him in the car, riding in front of the grandstands. Only one problem. There was nobody in the grandstands except about 5 people. So the picture here from the other side was Dole going like this, waving in the car to nobody. Front page of the Times. They fired his campaign manager the next day, or that week, who was running Dole's part of the campaign and for it all. And it was put somebody else in charge.
So when you ran for governor against Bateman in '77, you were coming off of a very intense experience. Yeah. There wasn't a whole lot of downtime between a '76 presidential election and a primary in '77.
No, and I had, and I basically brought that young staff with me, most of them, who had worked for the Ford campaign.
Chikatilo, Stevens.
Yeah, and when they sort of moved right in. So it was, from that point of view, it was a fairly smooth thing.
How was the campaign against Bateman? Was it I imagine it was a high-level campaign, knowing the 2 of you.
Yeah, we did some new things. I was the first candidate in New Jersey ever to use television in a primary. But our biggest problem we had was money. Ray, because he was the establishment candidate, was able to just on the phone, bring in what in those days, huge amounts of money. I remember we went on television to show the power of that medium, even in those days. I went on television and ran free because nobody else was on television. Nobody else ever had been in a primary. I went from about 10 points behind in the polls to 7 points ahead overnight after those television ads. The only problem was we used all our money to do that. and I was obviously not the favorite. All the people who want to give to people because they want to know somebody after they get elected weren't interested in giving to me, because chances were I wasn't going to be elected, because with 2 county chairmen out of 21, the chances were not great. And so we were getting our contributions and $20 and $50 and $10, that kind of thing. Ray, I remember at one point, picked up the phone, I guess, and got, I think it was 20 people to pledge, I think it was something which in those days was a lot of money to me, $20,000 or $30,000 each, and just overwhelmed us. I mean, in the end, he went, because for television then himself, we couldn't match it, or even come close to matching it. And, but it was interesting. I mean, I was the anti-organization candidate in almost every one of the counties. And that was...
What'd you lose by?
Quite a bit. I mean, I did better than people expected. Politics is always a game of expectations. And you always want to do better than they expected. And they did better than expected. But I didn't do very well. I mean, Ray won most of the campaign. In the process, though, I think he damaged himself because that was the year of the income tax. And I said that I didn't like the present income tax, and that if elected, I was going to change it, particularly in regard to school aid, and we'd repeal it and get something new. I remember going to Passaic County to debate Ray. Passaic County was on the Republican side. I don't know if it still is, one of the most conservative counties in the state. And we were debating it, and Ray said, I will abolish the income tax. We will not have an income tax in the state if I'm governor. And I couldn't say that because I thought, how are you going to replace the school aid? I mean, what are you going to do? And so he carried Passaic County after that, carried the convention, carried everything. But he got hard in that primary on the income tax and the idea that he was going to get rid of it and not replace it. And I think had a Republican candidate been able to run that year on modifying the income tax and changing it in ways that would have made it better and fairer, that he could have won. But Republican side, I don't know if it still is, one of the most conservative counties in the state. And we were debating it, and Ray said, I will abolish the income tax. We will not have an income tax in the state if I'm governor. And I couldn't say that because I thought, how are you going to replace the school aid? I mean, what are you going to do? And so he carried Passaic County after that, carried the convention, carried everything. But he got hard in that primary on the income tax and the idea that he was going to get rid of it and not replace it. And I think had a Republican candidate been able to run that year on modifying the income tax and changing it in ways that would have made it better and fairer, that he could have won. But taking that hard position that you were going to abolish the income tax made people say, how are you going to replace it? You know, what are you going to do? And then when you tried to come up with things, they weren't always credible.
The famous Bateman-Simon plan,
Yeah.
3 or 4 months later.
Yeah, yeah. So it was the roots came in that primary where Ray really came out much harder than I could come on the income tax itself.
By running for governor, you automatically forfeited your right to run for re-election as an assemblyman, but you told us already that you had decided.
Yeah, that decision came first.
Okay.
I mean, it was
and on primary day in June of 77, you say that one assumed that the Republican winner was going to beat Brendan Byrne in the fall.
Yeah.
Then what happened?
Well, after you lose a primary, you go away. So my wife and I went away, got out of the state.
Where'd you go?
Went to a place that she'd been as a child called Fisher's Island that she loved.
Off New York, part of New York.
Yeah, part of New York, off New London, Connecticut. You get there by ferry. And she had a couple of old friends there because she'd been there as a child.
You used to go there as governor, and the press used to.
That's right.
You
Used to tweak me for
not going to the Jersey
exactly Shore. Right. And after that, we started going up on a regular basis. But this is the first time we'd ever gone. And she took me away, sort of as a rescue, campaigning, because it wasn't that I'd lost a primary. That was not unexpected. But I had to stop and think what I was going to do at that point. So I'd been in politics now for 10 years, in the legislature for 10 years. I was running a small business, but it's not what I want to do with my life. So I had to give it some thought.
How much time did you spend at Fisher's Island?
I guess about 3 weeks, sort of recovering from everything. And then we came back to New Jersey. And I remember the next day, I got in the car all by myself and drove to the Bateman headquarters. Knocked on the door and said, what do you want me to do? And they had no idea what to do with me. You don't expect, I don't think. The campaign people didn't expect me to suddenly knock on the door and say, put me to work, what can I do?
Was that something that you had arrived at while on Fisher's Island? That you...
No, I'd been brought up in politics that way. I mean, as long as it's fair and decent, and Ray Bateman was, I say, a good friend. I think Ray Bateman would have made a great governor. And so I thought it was my obligation. I didn't know whether I wanted to do it or not. It was my obligation to do everything I could for him.
Was it also implicitly a decision on your part to stay in politics?
No, just to work for Ray. And in fact, I didn't want a position in the administration when he won. And I remember that he said to me late in the campaign, he said, you've been terrific. I want you very close to me when I'm elected. And I said, well, we'll talk about that when you're elected. But I wouldn't have taken it. I didn't want to be a member of the cabinet or what have you, or chief of staff, whatever. I don't know even what he had in mind for me. One of his, Bill Taggart, who was very close to Ray at that point and working for him, said, Ray wants you right in the governor's office with him, working on policy. So I don't know whether you had vision.
Why didn't you want that?
I'd never worked for anybody else in my life. It's a strange thing to say. I don't mean to be arrogant, but I never had. I'd always been my own boss ever since I used to run that camp. I mean, I ran a small business, was leader in the legislature. I'd never really ever worked for somebody else, and I knew what that meant. I mean, if you accept a position in an administration, you've got to do everything that leader wants, whether you agree or not. I just didn't want to do that. I mean, I thought I'd agree with Ray on most things, but I just didn't want to do it. I didn't want to commute to Trenton every day either. I mean, we lived in Livingston. It's an hour and a quarter, an hour and a half away, depending on the traffic. It's just not what I wanted to do. So I would not have done that.
Before we get to what you did do, and I think we're going to take a break shortly, but let me just ask you about that campaign. Why did Brendan Byrne, who was expected to lose, win a second term, and Ray Bateman fail at unseating him?
Obviously, as everybody says, that the lack of credibility in the income tax issue was a big thing. And Brendan turned out to be a very good and a tough candidate, which nobody expected. He'd never really had to run before. I mean, he'd run against a guy called Charlie Sandman the first time, and Sandman proved to be no competition whatsoever. So he never really had to do a campaign. And so nobody thought at that point Brendan was a very good speaker. He was unpopular in the state. And I don't think people expected him to put together a very good campaign. But thanks to Harold Hodes and Dick Leone and a number of people who were with him at that point, he developed into a very, very fine candidate. Ray had problems. I don't think he had the very best campaign staff around him. It was too dominated by Republican county chairmen who may be good in their own counties, but aren't always very good. Look at the state picture as a whole. He had very few people with him who understood, I think, the kind of state New Jersey is outside the Republican Party. The kind of things candidates you've got to be if you really want to win a majority in the state and not just win the Republican side. I think they took it for granted, frankly. I think they thought they read the polls and figured we're going to be elected. And when I went into that headquarters and started volunteering, there were too many people in the headquarters talking about what their jobs were going to be, frankly, and what I'm going to be, and am I going to be in the cabinet, am I going to be this, am I going to be that, and that's what they used to talk about. And I thought, that's not good. So I don't think he had the best group of people, but he had some young people who I got very close to. That was the time Roger Bodman and I became friends. The guy who drove me around when I was speaking was a young guy called Chris Daggett. I liked those two tremendously at the time. Alpha Sola was another guy who was working for Ray at that time, who I really liked. Bobby Franks, who I'd known for a long time, but had been very involved with the Bateman campaign at that point.
All of these would become key members of your team in the next decade.
Yeah. What I did is, frankly, after Ray lost, and I did decide, which took me a while to decide to run 4 years later, I cherry-picked. I mean, I knew because in volunteering for that campaign being in headquarters, he had a lot of people, frankly, who I thought were totally incompetent, really incompetent, in important jobs in that campaign. But he also had this young group of the Daggetts and the Budmans and young Kibby Bateman, and a bunch of people who I really liked. And I thought, these people are young Chris Brady. These people were good, and they were young, and they were energetic. So I wanted these people in my campaign. And I frankly once I decided to run, went on a personal campaign to try and talk them into my campaign. And because we had worked closely together on Ray's campaign and liked each other in the process, it wasn't too hard.
Governor, what did you do from 77 to 81?
Well, I stayed with my little real estate firm, generally, and then did a bunch of things that sort of interested me. I became a commentator for New Jersey Nightly News. I used to do Dick Leone, who had been Brendan Burns' treasurer, and I had become friends over the years. And Dick and I had a back and forth, conservative liberal kind of a thing, although it wasn't always conservative liberal. It was sort of but we'd find ways to disagree on whatever the subject was, and so we did that. I covered
once or twice a week on the news.
Once a week. No, maybe it's twice. Maybe it's more than that. It may have been 2 or 3 times a week. Yeah, it was more often than that. Yeah, and we enjoyed doing it and became closer friends in the process. And we found out, by the way, that we got to be better known than we thought. I thought, New Jersey Network is a great institution, but we thought, how is, people were really recognizing us. And what we didn't realize was that in those days, they would put our commentary on just before they gave the lottery results. And so we were probably among the most watched things on the network. But we did it for a number of years, and it was fun to do, and they taught me, what it taught me was how to do television. Because I remember we had a head of New Jersey Network at that point, or head of the News Bureau, maybe it was. I remember his name.
Herb Bloom.
Herb Bloom, who really sat me down and said, no, you don't, I was trying to be Walter Cronkite. I was saying, no, this is what we're going to, and he said, no. Calm down and talk naturally and so on. He's really taught me how to do television.
Was keeping your statewide profile high a motivation for doing this, or you?
No, I think it was.
Or a result of doing it.
I think it was a result of doing it, but I was doing it as a result of having a statewide profile. I mean, I think New Jersey Net was looking for somebody to represent the Republican side who wasn't in office, who nevertheless knew the issues and was somebody who was accepted by the party, and I fitted that category, as Dick Leone fitted it for the Democrats, since he'd left state government also. And there weren't a lot of other choices, I don't think, if they'd wanted to do that kind of a program. And for me, I enjoyed sort of keeping my hand in the sense in the issues. And I knew that my old friends in the legislature listened to us, would comment. And it was fun. It was fun. I enjoyed doing it with Dick. We're still pretty good friends to this day.
He ran for the U.S. Senate nomination in '78 against Bill Bradley and failed. I suppose that this started after that.
Yes, it started after that. He was it was a great shock to Dick, because this is what you learn. He was the point man for Governor Byrne. So people who needed things in administration came to Dick. And if you haven't been around government, he hadn't been. He was a graduate of Woodrow Wilson School and so on. He hadn't been around politics or government that much. Dick thought these people were all his best friends. And so when he ran for Senate, he thought they'd all support him. And I remember talking to him. He said, they're all bums. They're all coming in because they wanted something out of Byrne. As soon as I was out of the administration, they didn't have the time of day for me. Bradley was ahead in the polls and supported Bradley. So it was a lesson for Dick as to what politics can be really like. But the thing I did do was I kept doing my party chores, because I wanted to keep alive. I didn't know whether I wanted to run for governor or not. And but I wanted to keep alive the possibility So I kept on accepting invitations to the small Republican clubs around the state. I kept contact with the kind of people who had supported me in the last campaign. And we'd talk about it. And so I was out at least a couple of nights a week, going to some Republican affair rather than I was always at the big affairs. I had a debt left over from the campaign. Jerry Ford was nice enough to come in and do a dinner for me. And we made up the debt that evening.
I came to New Jersey in '78, which was when you and Dick Leone probably started that, and I used to watch the news every night because I needed to. And I'm now in the position that Herb Bloom was in then.
Yeah.
And I would just like to say, for the record, that that was pretty good stuff you and Dick Leone used to dish out. And that if I could find two people as high level as the two of you today, I'd love to have them on regularly.
Yeah. Well, it was fun. We did get a view. I mean, people would. I knew a lot of people watched because they'd comment on it to us, and it was fun. It was fun because you had to keep your hand in the issues. You had to recognize what was going on. You had to be quick enough to comment against a very bright guy. We didn't rehearse ahead of time what we were going to say to each other. We'd let us know the topic, and then we'd go at it. And so I never knew what Dick was going to say. He didn't know what I was going to say. And Dick was very bright, still is very bright. So he wasn't easy. And he's also got a good sense of humor, which is a little difficult sometimes, too, to deal with.
So you ran your real estate business. You stayed active in Republican politics. You did some television commentary. Was there anything else in that period of time?
Almost accepted a job. That was the period I almost accepted a job at the Metropolitan Opera. And I was looking for what I wanted to do with my life at that point. And
when did you decide you wanted to run for governor again?
Fairly late. I remember having dinner in New York with Dick Leone, and certain things stand out in that year before. And we were talking. Dick didn't know what he was going to do with his life at that point, because he was also at a crossroads. I said I didn't want to stay. I didn't want to run that little real estate firm, much as I liked it, for much longer. And I was talking about some of the things that I might do. And Dick was talking about some of the things he might do.
When do you think this was?
Probably in 1980. And I said, one of the things I was thinking of doing, obviously, is rerunning for governor. And Dick said, is there anything right now you want to do more than that? And I said, no, I haven't got anything else I really want to do at this point. He said, then do it. He said, do it. And I thought about it in those terms. I mean, this is, of all the possibilities, running for governor again mean? And I got closer and closer to doing it. And of course, again, I had these wonderful people who had been with me way back in some cases since the Ford campaign, and Carl Golden, people like that, who urging me. And I gradually came around to the fact that I probably ought to do it. It was, again, the party never supported me. I mean, I could not get the support again of the party organization. I think when I first ran, I had 2 county chairmen. This time I think I got 4 out of 21.
Of course, there were many candidates.
Yeah.
7 or 8
Oh yes. That's right. That's right. The favorite candidate was a guy called Pat Kramer, who had been a very good mayor of Paterson, Republican mayor of Paterson, and had the support of the business community, all the top people in Newark and all of that, and ran the firm, supported Pat. And another guy from my own county, which is always difficult, called Bo Sullivan, who had been a successful businessman, and Bo had a lot of money and was spending a lot of money. So he didn't, he was going to outspend everybody, and everybody knew that was always difficult. He was an attractive guy, too. And then there were a bunch of others in the race who were good people. I mean, Rich McGlynn had been a friend of mine for a long time, but decided he wanted to be governor. Tony Imperiale, who added some spice and interest to the to the race. There were 7 of us. Barry Parker, who'd been a friend of mine from the legislature for a long time. Carl Golden worked for him in the primary. And
Carl Golden worked for your 77
yes, yeah,
run?
yes.
Had he worked on the Ford campaign in 76?
No, he was in the legislature then still, I think. I think with the legislature. I think that was the position Drake Stevens did. Okay. So it was, but it was a time when a lot of, in my mind, very, very good people who had supported me at one time or another, who said basically, we don't care what our county organization thinks, we want you to do it and we're for you. And I was able to combine those people who had always been with me with people who I'd gotten to know in the Bateman campaign, like Chris Daggett. And I went on a real campaign to woo Roger Bodman because I knew how important a campaign manager was. I didn't have one. Nobody had one. I mean, nobody had somebody who was good and who could do it. And I'd worked with Roger in the Bateman campaign. He was then Jim Corder's AA in Washington. And I thought he would be the best person, which meant that I had to go and woo Jim Corder to get Roger Bodman. And so I did. And ended up getting the 2 of them, which was terrific because Roger became my campaign manager and Jim Corder became my overall campaign chairman.
He was a congressman at the time.
He was a congressman at the time, yeah.
I remember that the presidential convention of 1980 was a place where the Republican candidates for governor started making their intentions known. Bo Sullivan threw a fancy party. Pat Kramer probably threw a...
He did. They all threw parties.
Well.
They all threw parties.
You were there as a commentator for NJN.
Yep.
People sometimes joke about that the other guys spent all the money and
That's right.
threw the big parties, but you were the one who was seen back home on television.
Yeah.
Some truth to that?
Oh, yes.
By design?
No, not by design. I was asked to do it. And I hadn't been, I'd been, because partly of the NGN thing, I hadn't been active in partisan politics, in a sense, that much that year at all. And and I didn't, one, I couldn't have competed with some of the parties that size, and 2, I'd never liked them, and I never thought that did much good. It was what you should be doing to run for office. And NGN gave me an excuse not to do it. But I was as fair as I could. I interviewed them all.
You interviewed your rivals?
Oh yeah, covered the parties. Yeah, but I hadn't declared for anything yet. I don't know if I'd even decided to run at that point yet.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I was very much in my mind, but I know I hadn't made a final decision.
You remember when you did make a final decision?
Pretty late. Pretty late.
What does that mean? December, January?
Yeah, in that period. Yeah, some of the others were already declared. And I knew at that point that I wasn't going to get the party support again. Although I also knew that I was going to get more than I had the time before. And, I think people thought it was going to be between Pat Kramer and Bo Sullivan. I mean, there wasn't a poll between the time I declared in the primary and the general election that showed me ahead. Never showed me ahead in the primary, never showed me ahead in the general.
Really?
Yeah. One of the reasons people used to wonder why I didn't have a great use for pollsters, and the reason was I never found them to be that accurate as far as I was concerned in my campaigns.
Do you remember when you declared your candidacy?
Yeah, I guess it was around end of January, beginning of February.
Remember where?
No, I remember making the first television promo, but I don't even remember where. I assume it was in Essex County, probably at the Livingston Holiday Inn or somewhere around there. Generally, most candidates declare around their home base, and I think I probably didn't. And it was very important for me because Bo Sullivan tried to buy my county away from me. If I hadn't had my home county support, it would have made it almost impossible to run.
Who was the county chairman?
County chairman was John Renner.
Still?
Yes.
All right.
And
he was a long-standing.
yes.
He served for a long
Yeah.
time as county chairman.
And nobody
You put him in your cabinet eventually.
I did.
Community Affairs
Yeah,
Commissioner.
that's right. Nobody needs money more than a Republican chairman of Essex County. And Bo was his biggest contributor by far, for every one of his dinners, for every one of his fundraisers, and had been for about 3 or 4 years. And so I looked at Renner and I thought, I don't know. This guy's is funding the party organization, and he thinks that means he's going to get their support, and maybe he's right.
What did Renner do?
Renner supported me, and I think it was tough for him because because a lot of his own people, along his county, along number of his town chairmen said, we depend on Sullivan to run the party here, and you're going to support this other guy.
What were your personal relations with Pat Kramer and Bo Sullivan at that point in time?
I didn't have many relationships with Bo Sullivan because he had been I saw him at fundraisers that I attended. He would have 5 tables or whatever, But I didn't know him that well. I knew Pat Kramer, and I always gotten along with Pat. And Pat and I were sort of the same stripe Republican and agreed on most things. And I guess that helped him out from time to time. And when I was in the legislature.
What were you running on or as in that primary?
I guess I was running as a middle of the road thing. I mean, there were people running certainly far to the right of me. Bo Sullivan, I remember he and a couple of other people were competing for the right to life vote. And I remember who the right to life candidate was. I remember Bo coming in and saying that not only would I not, he said, I'd forbid all abortions anytime, not affecting mother and life of the mother, or rape or incest, anything. I thought, woo. But he was competing with someone, who the other person was. There was somebody else in the race, competing for the right to life vote.
Were you pro-choice at that time?
Yeah. And that was difficult because I've always been pro-choice because I've never been able to bring myself to tell a woman what to do, even though I'm anti-abortion myself. I don't like the whole thing. But, I just never believed you should tell another person what to do. I'm also a libertarian in that in a lot of other ways. And I remember a couple of county chairmen came to see me, including the county chairman of Middlesex. And this was a primary that was going to be very close. And I said, will you spend some time with us and hear a little bit about right to life? Sure. So they took me, brought in somebody from the national movement to talk to me, showed me some of those awful movies of fetuses and all of that, and said, if you support right to life, I will guarantee you Middlesex County and I think 2 other counties.
Who's saying this?
The county chairman of Middlesex. And because, the right to life has always been very strong in the Republican Party. And I said, we want to support you, but we just need you to be right to life. And we support you in every other way. And so I went home and thought about it. And just couldn't do it. I called him up the next day and said, look, I just got to disagree on this. And he went out and supported somebody else. And I don't know if it was Bo or somebody. I don't remember who the other one was, but it was somebody else in that race who was also strongly. No, Woolwick wasn't. Well, Woolwick was was a funny campaign. He ran as the most conservative candidate, except his wife wouldn't let him be right to life. I think it was his wife, so he never was right to life.
Walwork we're talking about. He was also from Essex.
Yes, he was my state senator. I was in the assembly for years and years and years. He was my commander when I was in the National Guard.
Really?
Yeah. He was a West Pointer, so we all hated him. Yeah, National Guard guys. Oh, he'd come in, spit and polish and say, your boots aren't polished enough and so on. We didn't like that at all. So I think when he ran against me, I think I got the whole National Guard vote.
Why do you think you won that primary?
I had by far the best campaign. And people sort of walked in the door, I mean, people like Lenny Coleman and people I didn't know that well sort of walked in the campaign to volunteer, just because they liked the kind of things I was saying. And but with that, I just had a better kind of campaign operation. I already had a base. I had a very strong, very strong conservative support. I mean, Jack Kemp came in, that kind of conservative, not the socialist conservative, but the economic conservatives. Jack Kemp came into campaign for me in the primary. This is a Republican candidate for president coming in a primary to campaign for somebody, because he liked what I was saying about how I was going to bring the cities back. And he liked, which everybody else in the campaign thought I was crazy in the primary talking about cities. But Jack Kemp, I talked about urban enterprise zones. And Kemp came and campaigned for me because of some of those positions. And so I think I had better positions on some things that attracted people. I had a conservative base of support, based on those people who had been for me for a long time, because I thought of me as the anti-establishment. I was still an anti-establishment candidate. I mean, I still wasn't being supported by the sort of establishment of the Republican Party that was supporting Pat Kramer. And I think I did well in things like debates and those kind of things. There was 7 of us. We traveled like some kind of a pack, and it was funny. I mean, poor old Rich McGlynn, I think, who ended up spending more money than anybody had in the primary and got less votes for the money. And Tony Imperiale, who was sort of half a joke, but not a real joke, because he was sort of a racist in the process. But I remember going into Princeton one night in that primary, and 7 of us would give answers to everything. And this woman asked us how we felt in the death penalty. And so everybody, Republican primary, most people were generally supportive. And it got Tony Imperiale was the last one. He looked at this Princeton audience, and said, getting sort of dark out there. All these people are telling you how strong they are in law enforcement with death penalty and everything else. It might not be too safe out there. You all have to get home tonight. Would you rather go home with one of these guys or with Tony? So it had its moments, but it was an interesting campaign. We all, interestingly enough, one of the best things I did in that campaign, which I've always been able to do in campaigns, which other people don't, I don't know why, but other people don't seem to be able to do it. I've generally made friends with my opponents in a funny way. For instance, when I ran for governor, almost every Democratic opponent I'd had for the Assembly ended up supporting me in my Assembly races. And in that primary, when we finished, Pat Kramer, first of all, Bo Sullivan, which is very gracious, brought over his whole family to my campaign headquarters that night to pledge their support. Pat Kramer called me the next morning and said, I'm going to have a barbecue at my house Saturday night, next Saturday night. I'm inviting all 7 of us, and each of us wants to tell you how we're going to help you. And so we did that. And we had a barbecue at Pat's house, and every candidate, including Woolworth, who I don't think loved me because we'd been from the same legislative district, even a senator, he'd been in Assembly, and I think he always resented the fact that I was going to be the nominee. But they all pledged. And so I had a totally united party the week after the election, which is, usually candidates have to work a while to get a party united. And they had they didn't like, some of them didn't like each other, but they all seemed to get along with me.
Were you perceived as the ethics in government candidate in that field?
Yeah, I suppose, because I've been interested in a lot of that. I mean, in the legislature, I've always been known for that. And I'd talk about it some, and I guess, and in that, yeah, probably in that
Did
field.
that help, do you think?
I like to think it does. I never know. I mean, a lot of candidates run on ethics and don't do very well. I wish they did. So it's definitely part of my campaign, definitely part of my presentation very often. But I really don't know. The issue became, that campaign, even more so in the general election, became jobs. We were in the worst recession since the Great Depression at that point. And New Jersey had factories closing, and I remember campaigning. One of my ads was done in a spot in Bergen County where there'd been an automobile factory, and there was grass growing in the parking lot. I did my campaign in sowing the grass and saying, you know, if I'm governor, we're going to have new jobs in this place.
While 7 of you on the Republican side were running around, I believe 11 Democrats were competing for the nomination. Congressman Jim Florio, who had also run in '77, won won that primary. How did you regard him at that point in time?
We'd served in the legislature together. And we got along. He wasn't my best friend. He was, we disagreed strongly on some issues, always had. I knew he was tough. I knew he was hard. I knew he was going to have the support of his party. I mean, he was a favorite, I think, all along. So as opposed to our primary, I think the favorite emerged at the end of theirs. And I knew it would be a very, very tough campaign. Plus which, because of the recession, and because, believe it or not, Ronald Reagan was unpopular at that point. This was the beginning of his administration, the middle of a recession. And people looked, he'd been in office a year, I guess, and the economy's getting worse, not better. And people always blame the incumbent. So he was well below 50% at that point in the polls. In fact, interestingly enough, and it's hard to think of now, recognizing how popular Reagan became, that my campaign people asked me not to have him in. Thought he'd be a liability.
Did he come in or not?
Oh yeah, I said, you're crazy. The President of the United States wants to come in, you're going to tell him to stay out? So I said, yeah, of course we would. He came in.
Well, that would happen 20 years later. People didn't want George W. Bush to come in campaigning for them at the end of his presidency, or Bill Clinton maybe at the end of his presidency.
Yeah, well, that's true. I thought it was a mistake. It's always the president wants to come in. I think he always be welcome to the president. But as long as the president realized you might disagree. But Reagan, there was about a month or so in the White House wasn't speaking to me because he had a fellow called James Watt in his cabinet. Now, I've always been constitutionally an environmentalist, conservationist in those days before I was ever anything. I mean, I always loved the outdoors. I loved being involved. I think every important environmental bill in my time in the legislature, I sponsored and wrote a lot of them. And so most people would tell you in those years, I was the leading environmentalist in the legislature and perhaps in the state. And this guy Watt was just the opposite. So somebody asked me what I'd do about Watt, and I said, I think he's an abomination. He'd be fired.
He was Interior Secretary.
Yeah. I said I'd get rid of him very fast. And the White House didn't like a Republican candidate saying he should fire a member of his cabinet. So the answer was just to cut off communications. So usually, you can call the White House and get a little help here or there. Nothing for about a month or so as a punishment to us.
But all was forgiven by the time you were the nominee?
No, this was after I was the nominee.
After you were the nominee.
After I was the nominee. Oh yeah. Oh yes. Yeah. No. It was over the summer, and by the fall, they were fine, I think. And I wasn't going to back off. I mean, I thought I would have fired Watt. I mean, I think he was a bad guy certainly for anybody interested in the environment. But he was. The other thing I did in that campaign that Republicans thought was foolish was, I guess they were called in those days a moral majority, or whatever. And they said they wanted to come endorse me as a Republican candidate. And I said publicly I would not accept their endorsement because I didn't agree with them or believe in what they stood for. and people thought I'd committed suicide because they thought this was a national thing. I thought I was going to get Christians mad at me or whatever. Didn't make any difference, I don't think.
The moral majority are what we would call today social conservatives.
No, it was the Christian right, though. They were very. It was. I don't know. Who was it Jerry Falwell at that point, maybe, or one of those people was head of it. I just didn't agree with them on anything, and I didn't see why I was going to accept an endorsement from somebody I thought who'd drive away the center, which who were the very people I was trying to campaign to get.
You say that we were in a deep recession, Reagan was unpopular, and yet we had just had 8 years of Democratic governance at the state level. Were you counting on some kind of natural swing, a natural pendulum swing back to Republicanism? Or do you think that...
I thought I was probably going to lose. I wasn't counting on anything. I'm sort of a natural pessimist anyway. And things like that. And I was going to give it my best. But, I believed the polls, in a sense, in a way. I mean, everybody said I was going to lose. The Democrats were running pretty well nationwide. I ended up being the only statewide Republican to win that year. And I just, I was not optimistic about the thing. Florio was ducking me every chance he got.
Did you want to debate him?
Yeah, well, he finally agreed to a debate, and I remember he scheduled it in August because he figured nobody was back from vacation, nobody would be paying attention that early. And he said he'd do 2 or 3 debates, something or other, but he very much in his schedule was just to agree with him. So we debated in August, then Monmouth County. And Jim was a tough guy and a good debater. And I'd been known sort of as a nice guy, and maybe not the greatest speaker in the world. And everybody assumed that Jim was going to really take me apart in that debate. And he didn't. I think I won it. But at least I ran way ahead of expectations. And even though it was August, and even though it wasn't covered that much, that was a huge turning point in the campaign. I was still maybe 15 points behind the polls at that point. But that debate really resonated. And it was early enough to resonate so that it changed a lot of perceptions. And I think that was the point at which I started to really come up in the polls after that debate. And in retrospect, it was a bad decision by Jim. I mean, he should have debated me later rather than earlier, because he gave me a chance to get some credibility quite early on. And I think Jim made a lot of mistakes in that campaign, but that was one of them.
What was another one?
Oh, he was fixated in keeping a schedule. He always tried to be, do his 10 stops in a day, and 20 minutes in each one, and what have you.
Well, you were famous for being the opposite.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
dilly-dallying at every stop in order to shake every last hand.
Yeah, I think you should spend time with people. And I think you don't make much of an impression just speaking and running in and out of a meeting. I think when you stay and talk to people, they get to know you and what you stand for and what you believe in. And if you answer all their questions, you can have a chance of getting their vote. And I believe that not only about people, I believe it about editorial boards. Because I know the staff, I used to drive the staff crazy, because in those days, New Jersey had a lot of the small newspapers. And I would stay at those editorial boards till every last question had been answered. Sometimes well an hour over the time it was allotted, and there'd be something else waiting. But I ended up with the endorsement of almost every newspaper in the state.
Really?
Against a liberal Democrat. Yeah, the only paper I didn't get was a Bergen Record. He made a couple other mistakes. He was leading, as 15 points to the polls. New York Times asked us to come in. He said, "I'm busy." In South Jersey. It never came. So I was alone with the New York Times. New York Times.
They endorsed you.
They endorsed me. They don't usually endorse a Republican. They endorsed me. I think I don't. If Jim had shown up, I'm sure the Times would tell you they just liked me better or something. But I mean, you don't show up for the Times, they get a little annoyed. and I was endorsed. The only other paper I think that didn't endorse me was the Philadelphia Inquirer. I think I got every in-state newspaper except the Bergen Record. And I split the Times and the Inquirer. And I think that was because, as much as anything else, that I spent a lot of time with them.
What did you say about taxes in that campaign?
I was against them. I didn't like taxes, but I said you can't get rid of the income tax, but I said you've got to have a tax position here that's competitive. At that point, a number of people, very much like now, a number of businesses had rated New Jersey as one of the worst states to perform in. And part of it was taxes. Part of it was just climate. Part of it was they didn't think they were treated very well. And the economy was the issue in a recession. And we had an economy that was really going downhill, and you could see jobs disappearing almost week by week. And so every single thing I said in that campaign had a basis in the economy. When I talked about the environment, I talked about the environment in terms of having a place people wanted to live. That if you didn't preserve open space, you didn't have clean water, clean air, and so on, we're going to attract businesses, we're going to attract people. When I talked about exploding the budget on tourism, I talked about it because it was our largest employer in the state. And we couldn't let that go. We had to keep it. When I talked about the arts, I talked about bringing in $3 for every one that you spent on the arts and why we were so cheap on the arts. It was how much it was hurting, particularly urban economies. When I talked about cities, I said if we don't revive the cities, you're never going to really revive the state's economy. That if you're really going to do it, you've got to start where the people need the jobs the most. And that's the cities. And every single thing I talked about education in terms of the economy. I'd always been interested in education, but I turned about, if you don't educate, the one thing that we have in New Jersey is we have an educated citizenry. That's how we compete with the right-to-work states in the South, because even though we have higher salaries and higher pensions and all of that, there's a much more educated workforce, and we could show that and demonstrate it. So education is very, very important, particularly education of people who are economically disadvantaged, because we're wasting them otherwise. and the economy is going to have to take educated people. And so everything I said about higher education, I talked about the nexus between higher education and the research facilities in New Jersey, the drug industry, all of that. Every single thing I said in that campaign had its roots in bringing jobs back to the state. Some of them long-term, some of them short-term, but everything.
Is it possible to say what Florio was offering the public, or what issue he highlighted?
My memory is Jim was fixated in Washington. He was very, very opposed to Reagan's economic policy. Just thought it was wrong. That's what he wanted to talk about. So we ended up, that first debate, a lot of the debate was on Ronald Reagan, not about the state, about what Ronald Reagan's, what supply side economics was. And
were you a supply sider in that campaign?
Oh yes, oh yeah. I was the first supply side, one of the first supply siders in the country. At that point, I'd read Laffer, I'd read all of that stuff. And I believed it. I still believe that if you don't simulate the supply side, and particularly in states, it's not gonna work.
If you lower taxes, you increase revenues?
You can, yes, because and just the opposite. If you raise taxes, particularly beyond that of the neighboring states, you lose revenues, and that it's very much a balance. You can. I always felt, I don't know if I said this in the campaign, but I always felt as governor, when I needed to worry about taxation, I'd always look at what Connecticut was doing, Pennsylvania was doing, New York was doing, Delaware was doing, because there was a states around us who were competing. If somebody wanted to move down to a right-to-work state in the South, you couldn't compete with that if that's what they really wanted to do. But particularly when people leave New York City, a lot of them don't want to leave the area. So it's New Jersey, or it's Connecticut, or it's Pennsylvania, or Rhode Island, one of those states. So I always looked very carefully at what their tax structure was and made sure that our tax structure was just a little bit below them. And that's what I meant by supply side in the states. I'm not sure it always works at the federal level. In the states, it does. You've got to make things incentives. People do operate on incentives, and if you're thinking about locating a business here, one of your big costs is taxes. One of your big costs is transportation. When you look at what the costs are that he's business, and if you can make sure those costs are lower than neighboring states, you help enormously. I mean, when I was elected, it was the middle of the worst recession since the Great Depression. We had a billion-dollar budget deficit, which in those days was a lot of money. I cut a business tax or two in my first year, in the face of that, just simply to see, it was signed to the business community that things were changing. And we had to start to do things to get them back interested in the state.
You say that after the first debate you felt the dynamics shift a bit.
Yeah.
Did you feel through the month of October that things were narrowing?
Yes. Oh, yes. I didn't. There was no poll that showed, including our own internal polls. Nobody showed I was going to win, but no question it was moving in the right direction.
What did you think on election day was going to happen that night?
I'd composed a concession speech, and that's all. Particularly on election night, when in those days people didn't wait for the exit polls, when the polls to close till the exit polls revealed. So 2 of the 3 networks, that's by 7 o'clock, had declared Florio the winner. I guess 1 by 7, 1 by 8. So what do you think? You've been behind the polls all the way along. 2 of the networks say you've lost, and one of them said, it was looked as if Kaine was coming up in the polls. That only didn't happen. And he's going to lose by more than anybody thought he was going to lose by.
Do you remember where you were that night?
At home.
You were at home?
Yeah.
You didn't have a campaign?
Yeah, I had a campaign at Livingston, but I took the returns at home. And then I went down to the headquarters. And I wrote a concession speech and went down to the headquarters and said to Roger Bodman, who's my campaign manager, I said, Roger, I don't believe in these candidates who want to get in the 11 o'clock news, and when they've lost, just wait around. I said, look, let's give Florio a nice night. He deserves it. I'd like to concede now. It was about 8:15, 8:30. And Roger said, can you just wait a little while? There's some interesting returns coming in from some of the Democratic areas. He's not running as well in the Democratic areas as Democrats should, and you're running much better in Democratic areas than a Republican should. And all that campaigning I'd done in the cities and the campaign, when I totally ignored everybody's advice and campaigned hard in the cities. And
I was struck by rereading our previous interview. You said when you win a vote in the cities as a Republican, that's 2 votes.
Oh, yeah. I went places, not only no Republican had gone, I went places no candidate ever gone.
Like where?
God, I remember one night, I think it was called the Night Owl. It was a bar, and I think it was Springfield Avenue in Newark. And I went down there with one of my campaign workers, and it was late at night, and I walked in. I was the only white person in the place, which is not unusual at some other places, and walked in, and God, I'd never gotten such a cold reception. Just nothing. Bartender sort of turning their shoulder and things like that, and I started shaking. I wouldn't even want to shake hands. I turned to the guy with me and said, there's something wrong here. I don't think we really belong here. And he said to me, no, these people are usually very friendly. There's something going on here. Let me talk to the bartender a minute. Talk to the bartender. The bartender came over and shook my hand. I apologize, he said. He's the last white guy to come in here was from the ABC, tried to close me down. He said, I thought you were one of those guys. But, so I was, I campaigned hard. The Central Ward of Newark, South Ward of Newark, Democratic areas in Middlesex County. Paid off. Because I remember Jim Florio took the Italian areas in Essex County, my home county, for granted. For the North Ward and Nutley, Belleville, part of Montclair. I did very well in those areas. Because he took them for granted. How they ever came, he thought they were so heavily Italian, and he was going to be the first Italian-American governor elected, and he thought that would do it.
So we went through that whole night not knowing who won the election. Did you both declare victory the next day? What happened?
No. I don't think either of us did declare victory. Both of us said the truth. I remember going home at about 2 o'clock in the morning and spoke to things and said, look, we're a little bit ahead, but who knows? We're not going to know this at least tonight. And thank you all. Go home to bed, and we'll hope for the best in the morning. And I went home, and first time I realized something, there was the same thing happened to Jim, I think, Florio. Got home, and there was a state policeman in the front hall. I said, what do you want? He said, basically, you may be governor, and you've got us for a while. You are. And they were with me from then on. But same thing with Jim for a while. And I remember after about 4 or 5 days, we dedicated, I don't know, one of the Hiltons, I think, maybe on Route 10. And they wanted a new governor. We both showed up. I got the ribbon. There's a picture of us, both of us with scissors, cutting the ribbon. And
what was that period? It was a 3-week recount.
Yeah.
What was that period of time like? Excruciating, exciting?
Well, it was excruciating, sort of silly in retrospect. I mean, funny things that happened. I mean, we had all sorts of. A lot of people were, as his people were all watching the recount, watching the polls in the counties, houses, as the things were recounted. And I remember Roger thought that some of our people didn't understand well enough, so we rented a voting machine and brought it into the headquarters so that we could train the people who were watching the recounts as to what to watch for. And somebody saw us carrying a voting machine into the headquarters, and the police came. Some Democrats had called the thing, said, they stole an election machine and they're counting themselves. But and it's sort of silly things like that. And they'd call you, you'd get a call from a county clerk and he'd say, we've recounted, and the Republicans would all call me first, Democrats probably all call Jim first, and they'd say, we've recounted this and that town and you've gained 3 votes, you've lost 3 votes, what have you.
I seem to recall one of your confidants telling us in one of these sessions that your side did something very clever. I'm not sure at what point in time, by declaring the victors and thereby declaring yourself the winners and thereby changing the perception in the public. Does that ring any kind of bell?
Yeah, I did that. I did that. Yeah, I waited till the recount was when the recount was over. And when the recount was over, I picked up votes. So it got up to 1,600 votes, or whatever it was.
1,711, I think.
Yeah.
The final number.
But I picked up 200 or 300 over there, which usually happens with the recount. Finds thousands and thousands of errors. But if it's a fair election, they usually balance out. So the winner usually stays the winner. And that happened in my case. And Jim was talking about whether to challenge it in the courts or what have you. Have a kind of a Florida situation, I guess. And I couldn't have that because at that point, I believed I had won, and that we'd had the recount, and I had to pick a cabinet. This is 3 weeks. You know what little time you have between you're elected anyway and the time you take office. So I figured I had to get going. I had to pick people. I had to start doing all the things you have to do to prepare to be governor. And I hadn't done any of them. I mean, we had no cabinet. We had nobody. And I had promised nothing to anybody. So there was no weren't even any expectations out there. So I've blank slate if it was going to be in the. And I only had at that point, 70 days before I had to have a cabinet in place, in office. So I figured I had to get going. And I waited a while, and Jim did not concede, so I went down to Trenton, had a press conference, and said I seem to be the governor, and this is how I'm going to proceed from here on in.
Did he concede after that?
Yeah, Jim conceded maybe a week or 2 later. I don't know, when he finally figured that. I think he looked at it, and I think there is another procedure where you go county by county, but it becomes expensive, and I think at that point the candidate has to pick up the expenses. And he just didn't. I think he thought his chances of winning that point was so small that it didn't make sense anymore. But he would have, if he had contested it in the courts, it would have created an uncertainty which would have made it very, very difficult to govern. And so I owe him a debt of gratitude for not doing that. He could have done that.
So when you finally declared yourself the winner, how'd you feel?
Like something hit me. I mean, it's unreal. One, because I hadn't expected to win. But all of a sudden, you know, I'd always had tremendous respect for the governor of New Jersey. Dick Hughes had been my model in some ways, who I'd worked with when I was first in the legislature. And, I've been friendly with Brandon Byrne, but Dick Cahill I'd worked with when I was his leader in the legislature. But I always had tremendous respect for the governor and the idea that there was always also a sense of mystery about the office, sort of what the governor really did. And the fact that I could walk into the governor's office as governor was just, I mean, it took a couple of weeks after the recount was over for me to get it. I mean, I was going through the motions of being the governor-elect, but in my head, governor? I'm the governor? It was really very, very difficult to conceive, and it was a tough time for me, just intellectually getting my head around it. In addition to the fact we were already behind, and the Democrats were preparing a welcome for me, which was not going to be very warm because they didn't think I'd stolen the election, but I thought they should have won it, and they should have, they should have won. I mean, they had everything going for them that year. They should have won it.
That's a good place for us to leave it for this session, and pick up with you getting adjusted to being governor next time.
Okay.